Stay with me, because before this night ended, a billionaire would lose his empire, a courtroom would erupt in silence, and the pregnant woman trembling on the marble floor would become the most powerful person in the room. The champagne glass shattered first. Then came the sound no one inside the Grand Crescent Ballroom would ever forget. Nathan Sterling's hand struck the side of Charlotte Hayes's face with a sharp crack that sliced through the orchestra music and silenced more than 300 wealthy guests in an instant. Crystal forks froze halfway to lips. Conversations died beneath the glow of 20-foot chandeliers. Even the pianist stopped playing mid-note. Charlotte stumbled backward in silver heels, one trembling hand flying protectively over her 8-month pregnant belly while the other caught the edge of a marble table to keep herself standing. Her breathing turned uneven, not from pain, from humiliation. Cameras immediately lifted across the ballroom like weapons locking onto a target. Phones glowed in the darkness beyond the candlelit tables. Nathan Sterling, CEO of Sterling Capital, stood perfectly still in his tailored black tuxedo, his cold blue eyes fixed on his wife with the same detached irritation a man might show towards spilled wine on an expensive carpet. "You embarrass me," he said quietly, yet somehow every person in the ballroom heard him. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came out. Her chest tightened beneath the fitted satin gown. She already struggled to breathe inside. The baby shifted hard beneath her ribs, as if reacting to the tension surrounding them. Across the room, Vanessa Coles slowly lowered her champagne flute, the corner of her mouth curling into a faint smile that looked almost rehearsed. Beautiful, controlled, dangerous. The entire city knew rumors about Nathan Sterling and the glamorous executive who never seemed far from his side. But seeing her standing there tonight beside him during his wedding anniversary gala felt different. Public, intentional, cruel. "Nathan," Charlotte whispered softly, trying to steady her shaking voice. "Please. Everyone is watching." "Good," he replied. "Maybe now you'll finally learn how to act like the wife of a serious man." A ripple of discomfort spread through the ballroom. Several women exchanged glances. One older investor quietly set down his glass and looked away. Near the back wall, a young event assistant muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath while still recording on her phone. Nathan adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo calmly, as though the destruction of his marriage was merely another business negotiation. "You were supposed to smile tonight," he continued. "Instead, you created another scene." Charlotte felt heat rush into her face. Not anger, shame. Weeks of sleepless nights, whispered arguments, canceled dinners, and cold silences suddenly crashed down on her all at once beneath the blinding ballroom lights. Then Vanessa finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached Charlotte with polished elegance. "Maybe she's emotional because of the pregnancy hormones," Vanessa said lightly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A few uncomfortable laughs escaped the crowd. Charlotte looked at her husband one final time, silently begging him to stop this before it became irreversible. But Nathan never looked away from Vanessa. And that was the exact moment Charlotte realized something inside her marriage had already died long before tonight began. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, the massive doors suddenly opened. Cold night air swept through the golden hall. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. And when Charlotte turned toward the sound, her eyes widened in shock. Adrian Hayes had arrived. The ballroom seemed to inhale all at once as Adrian Hayes stepped beneath the gold chandelier light, his dark charcoal overcoat still carrying traces of rain from the Manhattan streets outside. At 6'3", with the rigid posture of a man shaped by years of military discipline, he moved through the crowd with calm precision. But there was something in his eyes that immediately unsettled the room. Guests parted instinctively without understanding why. Charlotte's breath caught the moment she saw him. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief she had been trying to suppress for months. Nathan Sterling's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew exactly who Adrian Hayes was. Former Navy SEAL, founder of Hayes Strategic Security, a man whose clients included federal judges, Fortune 500 executives, and foreign diplomats. More importantly, Adrian Hayes was the one person Nathan had hoped would never discover what had really been happening inside his marriage. Adrian's gaze landed first on Charlotte's face, then slowly lowered to the trembling hand protecting her pregnant stomach. then to the faint redness still visible along her cheek beneath the ballroom lights. The silence around them deepened. "Charlotte," Adrian said quietly. Just her name. Nothing more. But the way he said it nearly shattered her composure completely. Nathan stepped forward first, adjusting his cufflinks with forced calm. "This is a private matter between my wife and me." Adrian finally looked at him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. "A private matter?" Adrian repeated softly. Interesting choice of words considering half this ballroom just watched it happen. Near the back tables, several guests quickly lowered their phones. Others continued recording discreetly beneath the white tablecloths. Nathan noticed. His public relations instincts were already calculating damage control. "Charlotte is emotional," Nathan said smoothly. "The pregnancy has been difficult." Vanessa nodded beside him with practiced sympathy. "We are all concerned about her stress levels." Adrian did not even glance at Vanessa. His attention remained fixed on Charlotte, who suddenly looked exhausted beneath the weight of the evening. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the lights, but up close he could see the truth no designer fabric could hide. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet fear she was trying desperately to conceal. "How long?" Adrian asked calmly. Charlotte froze. Nathan immediately answered for her. "I think tonight has become dramatic enough." Adrian ignored him completely. "Charlotte," he repeated gently. "How long has this been going on?" A memory flashed through her mind so quickly it almost made her dizzy. Nathan criticizing her weight after the pregnancy. Nathan canceling doctor appointments. Nathan sleeping in another room. Nathan deleting messages when she entered the room. Tiny fractures that slowly became a life she no longer recognized. Charlotte lowered her eyes. "A few months," she whispered. Adrian's expression did not change, but his silence somehow became more dangerous than shouting. Across the ballroom, the orchestra members pretended to organize sheet music while secretly watching everything unfold. The entire gala had transformed into something else now. Not a celebration. A public collapse. Nathan forced a smile that looked thinner by the second. "You are making assumptions based on one emotional moment." "No," Adrian replied quietly. "I am making observations." Then his eyes shifted toward the security cameras mounted high above the ballroom entrance. Small black domes hidden among the gold architecture. Nathan followed his gaze and suddenly felt something unfamiliar move through his chest. Concern. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and removed his phone. "Lock down every security feed from this building," he said calmly into the receiver. "No footage gets deleted. No exceptions." Vanessa's confident expression faltered for the first time all night. And somewhere deep inside Nathan Sterling's carefully controlled world, the first crack finally appeared. The whispering started before anyone realized how fast the footage was spreading online. One guest sent the clip to a private group chat. Another uploaded 12 seconds of shaky video onto social media. By the time the orchestra quietly resumed playing to ease the tension inside the ballroom, thousands of people across Manhattan had already watched Charlotte Hayes standing frozen beneath crystal chandeliers while her billionaire husband publicly humiliated her. Nathan Sterling understood public image better than anyone in the room, and that terrified him more than Adrian's arrival. He forced himself to smile as photographers near the stage pretended not to stare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan announced smoothly, raising his glass with calculated confidence. "I apologize for the unfortunate misunderstanding tonight. My wife has been under considerable emotional pressure during the pregnancy." Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. There it was again. The same polished manipulation he used behind closed doors now dressed up in front of cameras and investors. Emotional pressure. Hormones. Exhaustion. Never truth. Always narrative. Vanessa stepped closer beside Nathan, her diamond bracelet catching the ballroom lights. "Charlotte has been very sensitive lately," she added gently, almost sounding compassionate. "We are all trying to support her." A few uncomfortable nods moved through the crowd, but nobody looked convinced anymore. Adrian remained completely silent near Charlotte's side, his expression unreadable. That silence unnerved Nathan more than confrontation ever could. Charlotte suddenly became aware of how many eyes were fixed on her. Wealthy investors, reporters near the entrance, socialites pretending to sip champagne while secretly recording everything beneath the table linens. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. The baby shifted hard again beneath her ribs, and she instinctively pressed her palm against the movement. Then Vanessa smiled. Small, precise, cruel. Perhaps, Vanessa said lightly. This evening became overwhelming because Charlotte still struggles to accept certain realities. Nathan did not stop her. That hurt more than anything else. Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. Nathan, she whispered softly. Please. But he only exhaled with visible irritation, as if her existence itself had become inconvenient. You made this public the moment you created a scene, he replied coldly. You could have handled this privately like an adult. Several people near the stage exchanged stunned glances. One older woman quietly muttered, "Unbelievable," under her breath. Charlotte felt her throat tighten painfully. Memories crashed through her mind one after another. Nathan missing doctor appointments. Nathan sleeping at the office. Nathan criticizing the nursery expenses while buying Vanessa jewelry worth more than most American homes. Tiny humiliations stacked carefully over months until she no longer recognized herself. And somehow, standing beneath these glittering chandeliers tonight, she realized the cruelest part was not the betrayal. It was how long she had convinced herself to endure it quietly. Across the ballroom, a notification sound echoed from someone's phone. Then another. Then another. Guests began checking screens simultaneously. One investor's face visibly changed color. A woman near the entrance covered her mouth in shock. Nathan noticed immediately. What is going on? He snapped sharply. Nobody answered him at first. Finally, a young executive lowered his phone carefully and cleared his throat. Sir, the video from earlier is trending. Nathan's expression hardened instantly. What video? The young man hesitated. The ballroom footage. Vanessa's confident posture suddenly stiffened. Nathan grabbed the nearest phone from a startled assistant and stared at the screen. There it was. 12 seconds. Crystal lights. Charlotte trembling beside the table. His own voice clear as glass. You embarrass me. The clip already had millions of views. Comments were flooding faster than the page could refresh. Public outrage. Financial speculation. Calls for investigations. Someone had already labeled it the Sterling Gala scandal. Nathan looked up slowly, fury flashing across his face for the first time all night. But Adrian Hayes was already watching him. Calm, patient, dangerous. Then Adrian's phone vibrated once in his hand. He glanced at the message briefly before lifting his eyes toward Nathan again. Interesting, Adrian said quietly. My team just found something else on the ballroom security footage. The ballroom no longer felt like a charity gala. It felt like the final minutes before a corporate disaster exploded live on television. Nathan Sterling stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, his fingers tightening around the phone, still displaying millions of views climbing by the second. Every refresh brought new headlines. Billionaire CEO humiliates pregnant wife. Sterling Capital scandal goes viral. Investors demand statement. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, someone quietly turned off the orchestra music completely. The silence became unbearable. Adrian Hayes slipped his phone back into his coat pocket with calm precision, but Charlotte noticed the subtle tension in his jaw immediately. He had seen something serious. What footage? Nathan demanded sharply, his polished public image beginning to crack around the edges. Adrian studied him for a long moment before answering. The kind that explains why my sister has looked terrified for months. Charlotte lowered her eyes instantly. Nathan noticed. Charlotte, he snapped coldly. Do not stand there pretending you are some victim in front of these people. The words hit harder than she expected. Not because they were cruel, because part of her still wanted him to deny everything and save what little remained of their marriage. Vanessa stepped closer beside Nathan, though her confidence no longer looked effortless. She kept glancing toward the phones around the ballroom, aware now that every expression, every movement, every whisper could become tomorrow's headlines. Perhaps we should continue this privately, she suggested carefully. Adrian almost smiled. It was the first emotion anyone had seen on his face all evening, and somehow it unsettled the room even more. That opportunity disappeared the moment somebody uploaded the footage online, he replied. Near the ballroom entrance, several men in dark suits quietly entered the event space. Nathan recognized them instantly. Hayes Strategic Security, Adrian's private team, former military, former federal contractors. The kind of men wealthy executives hired when situations became dangerous. Nathan's stomach tightened. You had no authority to involve your security company, Nathan said sharply. Adrian ignored the accusation completely. One of his men approached and handed him a tablet. The glow from the screen reflected briefly across Adrian's face as he reviewed the footage in silence. Then his eyes lifted slowly toward Charlotte. "What happened before the gala started?" he asked quietly. Charlotte froze. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. "Nothing," Nathan answered before she could speak. Adrian's gaze never left his sister. Charlotte. Her throat tightened painfully. She looked around the ballroom at hundreds of strangers pretending not to listen while secretly absorbing every second of her humiliation. Then she whispered the truth. "We argued in the car." Nathan inhaled sharply. "Enough." But Charlotte kept speaking, her voice trembling now beneath months of emotional exhaustion. "He said the pregnancy was ruining his public image. He said investors were tired of seeing me exhausted all the time." Several guests exchanged horrified looks. Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "That is not what he meant." Adrian finally looked at her for the first time all evening, and Vanessa visibly lost confidence beneath the weight of his stare. "Interesting," Adrian said quietly, "because the audio from the parking garage says otherwise." Nathan's face changed instantly. Tiny, almost invisible, but Adrian saw it. So did Charlotte. Fear. Real fear. The ballroom seemed to grow colder around them. "What audio?" Charlotte whispered. Adrian slowly turned the tablet toward her. Security footage timestamps glowed across the screen. Underground parking level. 42 minutes before the gala began. Nathan Sterling and Vanessa Cole standing beside Nathan's black Mercedes. Their voices captured clearly through nearby security microphones. Charlotte's hands began shaking before she even heard the recording play. Vanessa's voice came first. Calm, confident. After tonight, she will finally sign the documents. Then Nathan answered. "Once the baby is born, the divorce becomes much easier." The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers all at once. Charlotte felt the world tilt beneath her feet. But Adrian's expression never changed, because he had already heard the rest of the recording. And judging by the look in his eyes, the worst part had not even started yet. The ballroom exploded into whispers so loud they almost sounded like waves crashing against the marble walls. Investors leaned toward each other in disbelief. Socialites clutched their phones tighter. Somewhere near the stage, a reporter quietly slipped out to make a phone call, already sensing the story was becoming far bigger than a viral scandal. Charlotte could barely breathe. The recording still echoed in her ears like broken glass. "Once the baby is born, the divorce becomes much easier." Nathan Sterling stood frozen beside Vanessa, but his expression had changed completely now. The calm billionaire mask was slipping apart piece by piece beneath the pressure of public exposure. "That audio was taken out of context," Nathan said sharply, though even he no longer sounded convincing. Adrian slowly lowered the tablet. "Interesting," he replied quietly, "because context usually helps people look better. Somehow yours keeps getting worse." A few nervous laughs escaped the crowd before immediately dying again. Nobody wanted Nathan Sterling's attention focused on them tonight. Charlotte wrapped both arms protectively around her stomach as the baby shifted again beneath the silver fabric of her gown. Her legs suddenly felt weak from exhaustion. She realized she had not truly slept in weeks, maybe months. The constant tension inside the penthouse. The silence at dinner tables. Nathan disappearing for entire nights, claiming business emergencies, while perfume that was not hers lingered on his jackets the next morning. She had spent so long convincing herself she could save the marriage that she never stopped to ask whether it was already over. Vanessa stepped forward carefully, her polished voice softer now. "Charlotte, you know Nathan has been overwhelmed by the merger. This entire situation is emotional for everyone." Charlotte stared at her. For the first time all evening, something inside her finally hardened. "You wore white to my anniversary gala," she said quietly. Vanessa blinked. Several guests nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks immediately. Charlotte's voice remained calm, but the pain underneath it filled the ballroom more powerfully than shouting ever could. "You stood beside my husband all night, while I carried his child in front of hundreds of people." Nathan stepped forward instantly. "Enough." Adrian moved at the exact same moment. Not aggressively, not loudly, but suddenly Nathan stopped walking. Years of military instinct radiated from Adrian Hayes without effort. He did not need threats. The room already understood exactly what kind of man he was. Then Adrian's phone vibrated again. One of his security men leaned close and whispered something quietly into his ear. Adrian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Well," he said calmly, "that explains the offshore transfers." Nathan's face lost color instantly. Charlotte looked up in confusion. "What transfers?" Adrian studied Nathan carefully before answering. "Over the last 4 months, Sterling Capital moved approximately $80 million through shell accounts in the Cayman Islands." The ballroom erupted again. One investor nearly dropped his drink. Vanessa looked genuinely alarmed for the first time all evening. "That is confidential business information," Nathan snapped. Adrian ignored him. "The interesting part is where the money came from." Charlotte's heartbeat quickened painfully. Adrian turned toward her fully now. "Your trust fund." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the air inside the ballroom seemed to disappear. Charlotte stared at him, unable to process the words at first. "My father's inheritance account." Adrian nodded once. "Nathan gained limited access after the marriage. Someone has been quietly draining assets for months." Nathan immediately straightened his posture, trying desperately to recover control. Every transaction was legal. "Legal," Adrian repeated softly. "Possibly. Ethical is another conversation." Charlotte suddenly remembered dozens of financial documents Nathan pressured her to sign during the pregnancy. She had barely read them. He always said the stress would be bad for the baby. God. Her stomach turned cold. Vanessa slowly took a step backward, as if instinctively sensing the ground beneath them collapsing. But Adrian was not finished. He looked directly at Nathan and spoke with terrifying calm. "There is one more problem." Nathan swallowed hard despite himself. Adrian's gaze shifted toward Charlotte. "Your wife still owns 34% of Sterling Capital." The entire ballroom went dead silent again. And for the first time all night, Nathan Sterling looked afraid of his own pregnant wife. For 3 full seconds, nobody inside the Grand Crescent ballroom moved at all. "Charlotte Hayes still owns 34% of Sterling Capital." The words hung in the air heavier than the crystal chandeliers above them. Nathan Sterling looked as though someone had knocked the oxygen from his lungs. Around the ballroom, investors were already reaching for their phones again, whispering to lawyers, assistants, and financial advisors as panic quietly spread through the wealthiest room in Manhattan. Charlotte stared at Adrian in disbelief. "I thought Nathan transferred my shares after the merger paperwork," she whispered. Adrian shook his head once. "He tried." Nathan's jaw tightened immediately. "That is privileged corporate information." Adrian ignored him completely. The final transfer authorization required Charlotte's biometric confirmation. He looked directly at his sister. "You never completed it." Suddenly Charlotte remembered the document Nathan brought into the penthouse 3 weeks earlier while she was exhausted after a doctor appointment. He had pressured her to sign quickly, insisting it was routine restructuring before the baby arrived. But she became nauseous halfway through reviewing the paperwork and went upstairs to lie down. Nathan never mentioned it again. Dear God, Nathan had not just planned the divorce. He had planned the takeover. Vanessa's voice turned sharp for the first time all evening. "Nathan, you told me the shares were already secured." The second the words left her mouth, the ballroom exploded into louder whispers. Vanessa realized her mistake instantly. Charlotte slowly turned toward her, pain flashing across her face. Not because Vanessa betrayed her. That wound already existed. No, this hurt because Vanessa had just revealed something even worse. They had been planning together. Nathan exhaled hard and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Charlotte, listen to me carefully. We can still handle this privately." Privately. The word almost made her laugh. Millions of people were already watching clips from the gala online, while financial media networks began reporting on Sterling Capital in real time. There was nothing private left anymore. Charlotte looked at her husband and suddenly realized she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. The charming billionaire who once sent flowers to her office every Friday morning had vanished long ago, replaced by someone colder, smaller, emptier. Adrian's phone vibrated again. One glance at the screen changed his expression instantly. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "we need to leave now." Nathan immediately stepped forward. "She is not going anywhere." Adrian moved between them with calm precision. That was not a suggestion. Then Charlotte felt it. A sudden sharp tightening low in her stomach. Her breath caught immediately. One hand gripped the edge of the nearby table as she closed her eyes. Adrian noticed instantly. "Charlotte." Another tightening came stronger this time. Not pain exactly. Pressure. Stress. Her doctor had warned her repeatedly to avoid emotional shock during the final trimester. The ballroom lights suddenly felt too bright. The air too thin. Vanessa stepped backward nervously while guests openly stared now without pretending otherwise. "I think she needs a hospital," someone whispered nearby. Nathan's expression flickered with alarm for the first time all night. "Charlotte." He reached toward her instinctively, but she flinched away before he could touch her. The reaction visibly stunned him. Then everything happened at once. A champagne tray crashed somewhere near the stage. Security phones started ringing simultaneously. One of Adrian's men moved quickly toward him, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Adrian's face darkened immediately. "What happened?" Charlotte whispered weakly. Adrian looked toward the ballroom entrance where two hotel security officers were suddenly rushing toward the staircase leading down to the private parking level. "Someone just tried to access the security server room," Adrian said quietly. Nathan's face lost all color. Adrian noticed. So did Charlotte. Then Adrian slowly turned back toward Nathan Sterling. "Interesting timing," he said softly. The silence that followed felt deadly, because everyone in that ballroom suddenly understood the same terrifying thing at once. Somebody was trying to erase the evidence. The elevator ride down to the private parking level felt colder than the winter rain outside the hotel. Charlotte sat silently. Inside the back of Adrian's black SUV while Manhattan lights streaked across the tinted windows like blurred lightning. Her breathing had finally steadied, but the exhaustion in her face remained impossible to hide. One hand rested protectively over her stomach, while the other clutched the edge of her coat tightly enough for her knuckles to pale. Adrian sat across from her in silence, reviewing files on his tablet. His security team occupied the front seats, speaking quietly into earpieces as they coordinated something far larger than damage control now. Nathan Sterling was no longer dealing with a marriage crisis. He was dealing with exposure. The servers were not breached in time. One of Adrian's men finally reported from the front passenger seat. "We recovered everything before deletion." Adrian nodded once without looking up. "And the backup?" "Already secured off-site." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside her chest, relief mixed painfully with grief. Because every recovered file meant another confirmation that her marriage had been built on lies she never wanted to believe. The SUV stopped beneath the glowing entrance of St. Vincent Medical Center. Rain hammered softly against the roof, while paparazzi cameras already flashed across the emergency driveway. News traveled fast in Manhattan, especially billionaire scandals. Adrian stepped out first, immediately shielding Charlotte from the cameras with his coat as security pushed reporters backward. "Mrs. Sterling," one reporter shouted, "are you filing for divorce?" Another voice followed instantly. "Did Nathan Sterling steal from your trust fund?" Charlotte lowered her eyes and kept walking. The hospital doors slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss, flooding the lobby with sterile white light and the scent of antiseptic. Nurses recognized her immediately from the viral footage already dominating every major media outlet. "Room prepared upstairs," a doctor informed Adrian quietly. "Dr. Evelyn Carter is waiting." Charlotte paused mid-step. "Dr. Carter?" Adrian finally looked at her directly. "Your obstetrician called me 2 weeks ago." Charlotte froze. "Why?" Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "Because your stress levels were becoming dangerous." The words landed harder than she expected. 2 weeks ago. Her doctor had already been worried before tonight even happened. Inside the private examination room upstairs, soft monitor beeps filled the silence while rain traced slow lines down the dark hospital windows overlooking Manhattan. Dr. Evelyn Carter carefully adjusted the fetal monitor around Charlotte's stomach while keeping her voice calm and professional. "The baby is stable," she said gently, "but your blood pressure is extremely elevated." Charlotte nodded weakly, too emotionally drained to speak much anymore. Adrian stood near the doorway with folded arms, watching everything with terrifying stillness. Then Dr. Carter hesitated. "There is something else." The room instantly changed. Adrian noticed it immediately. "What?" he asked quietly. The doctor looked uncomfortable. 3 days ago, someone from Sterling Capital contacted the hospital requesting access to Mrs. Sterling's prenatal records. Charlotte's eyes widened in confusion. "What records?" "Delivery projections. Medical risk assessments. Estimated recovery periods after birth." Adrian's jaw tightened. Who authorized the request? Dr. Carter swallowed carefully. The paperwork carried Nathan Sterling's legal authorization as spouse. Silence swallowed the room whole. Charlotte stared blankly at the monitor screen where her baby's heartbeat moved steadily across the black display. Tiny waves. Tiny life. Tiny innocence trapped inside a disaster created by adults. There is more, Dr. Carter said softly. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward her. Say it. The doctor inhaled carefully before speaking. The request included preparation forms for temporary psychiatric evaluation after delivery. Charlotte's face went completely pale. What? Adrian stepped forward instantly. Dr. Carter lowered her voice. The documents suggested concerns about emotional instability during pregnancy. If approved after birth, it could have impacted temporary custody rights. The room went dead silent except for the steady rhythm of the fetal monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Charlotte suddenly understood everything. The manipulation, the financial transfers, the pressure to sign documents, the public humiliation. Nathan Sterling had not only planned to leave her. He had been preparing to take her child too. Adrian slowly turned toward the rain-covered hospital window, his expression colder than Charlotte had ever seen in her life. Then his phone vibrated once. He read the message silently before speaking 4 words that changed everything. The Federal Bureau responded. Rain continued falling over Manhattan long after midnight, turning the hospital windows into blurred mirrors of flashing city lights and television vans parked below. Inside the private recovery suite on the 14th floor, Charlotte Hayes sat silently beside the dark window wrapped in a pale gray blanket, while fetal monitors traced steady rhythms beside her bed. The baby was finally calm, but Charlotte was not. Her entire world had collapsed in less than 6 hours. Marriage, trust, safety. Every illusion Nathan Sterling carefully built around her had shattered beneath ballroom lights and federal investigations. Adrian stood near the doorway speaking quietly with 2 men in dark suits who had arrived 20 minutes earlier carrying government credentials and sealed folders. Federal agents. Charlotte never imagined those words would become part of her life. One of the agents finally approached carefully. Mrs. Hayes, he said gently, intentionally avoiding Sterling now. I know tonight has been overwhelming, but there are several things you need to understand immediately. Charlotte slowly nodded. The agent opened the folder in his hands. 3 months ago, the Financial Crimes Division began monitoring offshore activity connected to Sterling Capital. Adrian remained silent beside the door, arms folded tightly across his chest. At first we believed it involved tax concealment, the agent continued. But after reviewing the recovered security recordings and financial transfers tonight, the investigation expanded significantly. Charlotte looked confused. Expanded how? The second agent answered this time. Corporate fraud, financial coercion, attempted unlawful asset, acquisition. The words sounded unreal inside the quiet hospital room, like something from a courtroom drama instead of her own life. Adrian finally stepped closer and placed another document carefully onto the bed beside Charlotte. You need to see this. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside sat copies of corporate filings bearing Nathan Sterling's signature beside emergency restructuring requests filed just 48 hours earlier. Charlotte's heartbeat quickened immediately. What is this? Adrian's voice turned colder than the rain outside. Nathan attempted to remove you from the Sterling Capital Board permanently. Charlotte looked down the page again and suddenly noticed another signature line beneath Nathan's name. Her own, except she had never signed it. Her stomach dropped. That is not my handwriting. We know, Adrian replied quietly. Silence filled the room again except for the steady hospital monitor beeping beside her bed. Beep, beep, beep. Then the first federal agent slid a tablet across the blanket toward her. Financial news channels covered every inch of the screen. Sterling Capital stock had collapsed almost 27% overnight. Investors were pulling out publicly. Legal analysts were discussing criminal exposure live on national television. One headline flashed brighter than the others. Billionaire CEO under federal review after viral gala scandal. Charlotte stared blankly at the screen. Just yesterday, she had been worrying about nursery paint colors and baby clothes. Now billion-dollar corporations were collapsing around her. There is one more thing, Adrian said carefully. Charlotte looked up slowly. Adrian hesitated for the first time all night. Your shares. What about them? Adrian glanced toward the agents briefly before answering. Once the emergency board hearing begins tomorrow morning, your ownership position gives you controlling voting authority. Charlotte blinked in disbelief. Controlling authority? The agent nodded once. Nathan Sterling no longer controls Sterling Capital. The room fell completely silent again. Somewhere far below, thunder rolled softly across Manhattan. Charlotte lowered her eyes toward the tiny monitor tracing her baby's heartbeat beside the bed. For months Nathan had treated her like someone powerless, fragile, replaceable, easy to control. But tonight the truth finally surfaced beneath all the lies. The pregnant woman he planned to silence still owned the company carrying his last name. Adrian's phone vibrated suddenly in the quiet room. He read the message once before slowly exhaling through his nose. Nathan just arrived downstairs. Charlotte's expression tightened immediately. Why? Adrian looked directly at her. Because he is asking to see you. Another pause. Then Adrian added quietly. And according to security downstairs, he is on his knees. The rain had stopped just before sunrise, leaving Manhattan wrapped in cold silver light as news helicopters circled above St. Vincent Medical Center like restless birds. By morning, every major financial network in America was covering the collapse of Sterling Capital in real time. Reporters crowded the sidewalks outside the hospital entrance. Investors demanded emergency statements. Legal analysts debated prison exposure on live television, while stock tickers bled red across giant screens in Times Square. But inside the quiet maternity wing on the 14th floor, none of that mattered to Charlotte Hayes anymore. She sat beside the hospital window wearing a pale blue sweater from the hospital gift shop, one hand resting gently over the curve of her stomach while soft morning light touched her exhausted face. For the first time in months, the room felt peaceful. No shouting. No manipulation. No cold silences hanging across expensive penthouse walls. Just the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat echoing softly through the monitor beside her bed. Adrian stood near the doorway speaking quietly with hospital security when Nathan Sterling finally entered the room. Charlotte barely recognized him. Less than 12 hours earlier, he had stood beneath ballroom chandeliers looking untouchable in a custom tuxedo worth more than most American families earned in a month. Now his tie was gone. His hair looked disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. And for the first time since she met him, Nathan Sterling looked small. He stopped several feet from the hospital bed, as if uncertain whether he still had the right to come closer. Charlotte, he whispered hoarsely. She said nothing. Nathan glanced briefly toward Adrian before lowering his eyes again. Please, he said quietly. I need to explain. Adrian remained completely silent beside the door, arms folded across his chest like stone. Nathan took another careful step forward. I never wanted things to happen like this. Charlotte finally looked at him fully. There was no anger left in her expression now. Somehow that hurt Nathan more than rage ever could. You planned the divorce, she said softly. You moved money from my trust fund. You tried to remove me from the company. You prepared custody paperwork before our child was even born. Every word landed heavier than the last. Nathan's face tightened painfully. I was under pressure. Charlotte almost smiled at how empty the excuse sounded now. Billion-dollar scandals. Federal investigations. Corporate collapse. And somehow he still blamed pressure. Nathan slowly lowered himself into the chair beside the hospital bed, exhaustion finally crushing whatever pride remained inside him. I made mistakes, he admitted quietly. But I loved you. Charlotte looked toward the city skyline beyond the rain-streaked window. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then she finally answered with a voice barely above a whisper. People do not destroy the person they love. Silence swallowed the room. Even Nathan could not deny it anymore. Downstairs, cameras continued flashing while financial reporters announced that Sterling Capital's board had voted unanimously to suspend Nathan Sterling as chief executive officer pending federal investigation. Vanessa Cole had reportedly disappeared from public view before sunrise. Several investors were already cooperating with investigators. The empire Nathan spent 20 years building was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. But inside the quiet hospital room, none of that seemed to matter to Charlotte anymore.